I'm Jean Gray, publisher of American Entrepreneurship Today and host of the podcast series Experience Voices, where I talk with highly accomplished people who share the critical elements that led to their success. Whether a startup or a large corporation or government agency, cybersecurity is unequivocally paramount to protect business operations from outside intrusion. Our guest today on Experience Voices is serial entrepreneur Steve Visconti, co-founder and CEO of Exceed, a cybersecurity startup providing a proprietary architecture to protect enterprise networks and assets. Steve discusses cybersecurity for both large companies and startups. He discusses current threats that are in the news, as well as offering insight as a serial entrepreneur about funding and successful exits. Welcome to Experience Voices, Steve.
So thank you, Jane, for having me on. Yeah, Exceed is a very new company, and new in terms of how the technology sector works. If you look back at information technology fields and cybersecurity, the challenge is you have to present access to your users, but you have to prevent threat actors, what some people call hackers, from entering the network. And it's a very difficult balance to achieve for a corporation. So we developed a company and a framework called Zero Knowledge Trust, or Zero Knowledge Proof. I apologize for that. Zero Knowledge Proof that fulfills or fills in some of the gaps that we see in zero trust models and in the typical enterprise-wide data security networks. And those gaps came about based on essentially an industry that's grown up over years and cobbling together various disparate security mechanisms. And therefore, you ended up with little gaps in your network security. And with that, threat actors exploit those gaps. So we set out to provide a framework that overlays your existing networks that can close those security gaps. And we call it zero knowledge networking, in part because it heavily relies on this mathematical area called zero knowledge proof, which is used in encryption. So we encrypt not only passwords and usernames, but all the way through the network, including routing and the whole network protocol. So it's much different than what we have seen historically in the market. And we're focused on large enterprise as well as public sector, Department of Defense, and security.
When you say enterprise, how would the layperson translate that into size of company or type of network that they have in their company?
Yeah, the enterprise to us and actually to the market generally are companies that are 1,000 plus more employees, and some of them are many, many times larger than that. We're dealing with one company currently that has 360,000 employees worldwide. So these can be very, very large entities. And imagine providing network resources and data processing for 300,000 users and expecting that there is no security gap. No, there's going to be lots of security gaps. And that's where we step in and try and solve those problems for these large enterprise companies. Some of them known as Global 2000 or Fortune 500. You hear those terms as well.
Is your product an add-on to an existing security system that those large companies have?
Yes, absolutely. We call it an overlay because we don't want to disrupt what they're doing. We overlay an additional layer of security that will close these inherent gaps that we call them, close the holes that are being exploited by these threat actors.
Is there one particular type of threat that you've associated with the gaps that you identified? Or what are some of the sort of the common challenges that your product is sort of pulling together?
I wish there was one gap. I wish there was one security. Our products, Exceed Identity Management and Exceed Sealed Tunnel, will mitigate or eliminate over 70 security vulnerabilities. And so if you look at cybersecurity as a marketplace and what we're fighting against, these threat actors aren't what people think. They're not guys behind a keyboard trying to guess your password to get in. They're using very sophisticated tools that they've developed with software that programmatically attack your system and look for those holes and exploit those holes in your, the vulnerabilities they'll find in a firewall, as an example, or vulnerabilities in your email system where you click on a link that's nefarious and you now have a ransomware attack underway. So there's many attacks. There's thousands of attacks. We represent a fairly small part of the market, but an important part of the market. And as I mentioned, we mitigate about 70 of those known attacks.
When did you introduce it? And are there specific industries that were preferred versus others?
So great question on that. We set out to solve this problem in 2018. We spent 2 years prior to that interviewing enterprise level accounts, public sector agencies, intelligence agencies, and even under non-disclosure with a very large worldwide cloud company to try and understand better what the problems are that they were seeing. And then we settled in on an area that we felt that we can address. We started developing the product 2018, and it just came to market, commercially available June 2023. So that gives you an idea how difficult these problems are to solve. They take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and unfortunately, a lot of money.
And no particular industry that you feel is a glove fit at the get-go?
Yeah, early on, we know that public sector, in fact, in our early interviews before we started coding, developing the product, Defense Health Agency, which provides healthcare for, all of our armed services. They took a liking to what we were doing and more or less have sponsored us into the federal government. And so we know that Department of Defense is a very big part of what we do. We also work with intelligence agencies, various agencies that here in the U.S. and international as well. On the commercial side, finance, healthcare, manufacturing are the top three that we are approaching today. Over time, we will broaden our approach, but we have to stay somewhat focused as we're a smaller company.
Can you share a little bit about what it currently is happening? Everyone's hearing about ransomware. Is there a trend or a buzzword that takes over the industry for a period of time, and then you all rally around to find a solution?
Well, again, we see so many threats. We had to settle in on what we felt that we can help mitigate or eliminate. Ransomware is a very, very big problem, and it's across the world, and it's across every type of company and public agency. And ransomware is easy to get infected because you get these emails. Everybody sees them every day. Their private email, their company emails. Hey, click on this, or here's an invoice that you don't recognize. You open it up, and guess what? You just infected your computer. Antivirus is designed to try and solve that, but they can't stay in front of the profiles. Profiles are continually being reworked by these bad actors, and so it's a very difficult problem. So people will get infected, unfortunately. They have to learn to change their behavior at the user level, so they're not opening links from people they don't know. They're not opening documents from people that they don't know. So they have to be a little cautious on that side. Now, what we did to mitigate that, we're not an antivirus product, but we developed a system in which if a remote user is infected, they can still access the data from their corporate network, but we will not allow that ransomware or nefarious payload to enter the network. So we can't solve the antivirus problem that they have on their desktop, but we can keep the infection from coming into the network, and therefore we can prevent ransomware for agencies like healthcare companies and agencies and so forth.
So what I'm hearing is that the individual user in a large corporation or agency, they can still be the greatest vulnerability from a threat actor. Is that really the most prevalent entry point or source of the problem?
Yes, it is. And it's not just ransomware. There's another attack that's been launched for many years, and it adapts, called man-in-the-middle attack, where they get into your system as an individual user, and they just quietly will be there on your virtual private networking as an example. And when you log into your corporate system, they grab those credentials, they copy them at that point, username and password. So that's called man-in-the-middle attack. Then what they do when you hang up your VPN, they will go back in and do a replay attack. They will emulate you by replaying those credentials that they just stole. So those are some of the types of attack that we have to be very aware of and develop systems to prevent. And that's what we do. So between ransomware and man-in-the-middle attacks, those are two of the majors that we see.
Let's pivot, Steve, and let's tap into your experience as a serial entrepreneur. You've done funding, you've done exits. What would you advise a entrepreneur who is in a unfunded startup and who is now faced with scaling their company, their venture, because they've received significant funding?
Well, it's a great question. And I've done a lot. My whole career, just over 40 years now, has been in the technology sector. So I've done startups that are typically fairly well-funded. It's hard to raise money, but well-funded through venture capital. But having said that, I've also done some small businesses on the side. I have a little consulting business that I do just to help small business move into the United States from foreign countries, typically from Europe, where they want to set up here, they don't know how. And so I help them with that. So I have done small business as well. I just helped my son set up a new auto repair business here in Las Vegas, which is up and running in 3 weeks now and looks like it's going to be successful based on the traffic. But what I would say, there's no playbook that you can open and read on building a business. They will tell you all the fundamentals about keeping good books and setting up the right insurance policies and blah, blah, blah. So just guidelines. What you really need to do is use your knowledge, use your intuition, learn to adapt, listen, ask questions, and you can adapt your company quickly on the fly as you go. Obviously maintaining the guidelines of good business practice beyond that. Funding is a big challenge for small business. Most of them will be self-funded, or they'll go to friends and family, which is a great place to go. But if they stay at it, if they're focused, if they adapt, they use their intuition, they talk to people, they get advice, I think they, in most cases, will do very well. Try not to be rigid. That would be my advice.
Taking that one step further, Steve, can you share from your experience how a tech startup pivots from struggling and unfunded to being funded?
They have to be open to the idea of selling a portion of their company. So the way we typically do it in tech sector is we'll establish a company. And in the case of Exceed, there was 3 of us that started the company and 3 of us had equal share in the company, and that was it. We developed the software on our own nickel. Then we did a Series A, a first seed round, if you will, and we sell off 20% of the stock in exchange for cash. And we use that cash to grow the business. We'll do it again with the Series B. It's not uncommon that companies will do multiple financing. Each time they're selling 20% chunks. So they're taking some dilution, but at the same time, you're using other people's cash to build that business. And the value of the business will increase exponentially. So that's what you're looking at, is how do I increase valuation or value of my company? And you do that in part with outside investment. Could be venture, could be angel investors, it could be friends and family. But in all those cases, you really are selling off part of the company. Now, there are other ways to finance the company. Obviously, you drive the revenue as fast as possible. If you have a profitable or good gross margin in your product, then obviously you want to drive as much revenue as fast as you can so you don't have to take as much outside money and maintain more of the ownership, right? And so those are things that are helpful.
Right, but would you advise that company, again, that is still adapting, still growing, still figuring things out, but they are getting their product to market? Should they be bringing in a cybersecurity consultant? Should they? I mean, there's this gap now of where they didn't have enough money, but now they do have the money. And in the first year or two, they're scaling quickly. They have gaps. So how do they address it from the point of view of protection?
With cybersecurity, I would not compromise on that. And the reason is this: the risks are increasing, they're challenging, they're expensive, and they're never going away. They're getting, you're seeing more and more of them and more sophisticated. So as a small business, you need to bake that into your business plan immediately, that cybersecurity has to be a functional part of your business. Unfortunately, I say, because it is a cost to do that. But the cost is greater if you lose your intellectual property or you lose the ability to function as a business because of ransomware. You can lose everything by not spending the time or money and the effort to secure your small business. It's really important.
Is cloud computing part of that answer?
Cloud computing can be part of the answer. I'm a big proponent of cloud computing. I'm a big proponent of software as a service, using service providers like Office 365 or Salesforce.com to help you achieve your goals. That does not, in and of itself, solve your security problem. Each one of those vendors, cloud vendors and software as a service vendors like Office 365 or Salesforce.com, they all have their own security models that are in place, and you can rest assured they're very good, but they're not the full umbrella. You are going to have gaps. When you're in Starbucks, logging in with your username and password, beware. There's somebody there could be sniffing the network with tools on their laptop, and they just gained access to your account. So you have to be very cautious and almost what's the word? Be very insecure, or very insecure about the problem.
Once a company is hacked, and again going through the spectrum of small to very large, who is out there to help them deal with the threat or the successful hack that they now know is there? What part of the industry is about fixing it after the horse has already gotten out of the barn?
Yeah, well, there's lots of company in that business, and unfortunately, if you have to retain them, they are very expensive. So for large enterprise companies, you would go to Accenture, Capgemini, these big PwC, very large consulting companies, and it's going to be expensive. The average cost per data breach to the enterprise is about $3.8 million in actual cost. Worldwide, it's over $10 trillion, in the losses, right? So it's expensive. For a small business, it's more difficult. You're going to have to seek out the local or regional consulting companies, and they're going to charge you a lot of money. I would expect to pay $350 an hour on up to $700, $800 per hour for their team to help you recover data and put in place the tools that you need to protect yourself going forward.
And where's the government in all of this? Whether for the small guy or the big guy, is it the Department of Defense? Who are the players that have their thumb in the cybersecurity challenge that is really a day-to-day ongoing threat?
So there's Homeland Security, and there's Cybersecurity Information Systems, which is CISA, CISA.gov. They're focused on providing guidance and guideline and looking at what's happening in the marketplace in terms of these breaches and trying to educate the user. Unfortunately, they don't give you a lot of tools other than education and guidance. So you, small business, large business, you're on your own in terms of building the right protections up front. Get educated, put your security systems in place, make sure they're adaptable, make sure you're looking at them on an ongoing basis because the threats change. I can give you lots of examples of firewalls that have security patches in them, and a year later they have to be repatched. The vendor comes out with a patch. So when you get a notification for a software upgrade on your systems, please take the time and upgrade the software, because those, in most most of the time, those are security patches from Microsoft or whoever your vendor is. Those are security patches. They're very important. Don't delay.
I read somewhere then, and this was probably a few years ago, that the rogue employee or the disgruntled employee accounts for a significant portion of the security threats of a company. Is that true?
That is true. I don't know if it's a significant. It is significant. I don't know if it's the preponderance or not. I would suggest it's probably not as large as the outside threats, but depends on the industry. We call them bad actors. When you hear the term bad actors, that typically means an employee or consultant within the organization that is doing some nefarious things. And that is a big problem. And that's the most difficult one to protect yourself from, because think about it. If you have a bad actor in your home, they have a key to your house. I mean, you have no reason not to trust that individual, whether it be your brother, your cousin, or somebody that helps you doing housekeeping. You just assume that they are trusted. And that's what makes it such a difficult problem.
Are background checks for a new employee sort of mandatory? What do the large companies now do? Because you always hear they're now scouring Facebook to see what you're posting. But are there any steps or specific steps that large companies had figured out help identify or screen out the bad employee before being hired?
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely, yes. Background checks are a must, and they're super easy to do. I think that entrepreneurs and small company owners don't understand how easy it is to do. Most companies hire a payroll system, whether, I don't need to name them, but there's a bunch of them out there. Every payroll system, whether it's small or large, has a background check system embedded in it that's available to you as a business owner. And for every employee, you just require what happens. You just click the box, put in their email. You tell them in advance, obviously, that it requires a background check. You put their email in and click the box, and your payroll company will do the background check for you. They handle everything. Obviously, you have to get permission from the applicant, but that is number one. You should do that for every employee.
So you've built a few companies, before starting up Exceed. Were all of them technology companies, and what were some of the walkaways that you had that you immediately applied to starting this venture?
I would say nearly all of my companies are technology companies, with the exception of I did a consulting company, and I actually did another company that was in the ski industry, right? Downhill skiing, which was interesting. It was a lot of fun. Made no money, but it was fun. So yeah, primarily tech sector. And so I've been doing that, as I mentioned, for over 40 years, 41 years now.
And what areas were they in?
Well, as you can imagine, tech sector has changed a lot since, the early 1980s when I started. We were doing, we had invented some ways to emulate, and these big IBM mainframes that companies were built around, large companies. Mm-hmm. And with the advent of the personal computer, it was interesting to us. So the first company I worked with as a startup, we developed a way to turn that desktop computer into a IBM terminal that can attach to the big mainframe. So therefore, not only did you have this new desktop computer with disk operating system on it, Microsoft DOS, but you now can use that to talk with the big mainframe. So that was the first innovation that I was involved with back in the day. From there, the industry morphed into networking, and then one of my companies that I was involved with helped build out the internet. People forget the internet wasn't here back in the 1980s, and so in the 90s we were with a company my company was acquired into a larger company, and we built a product that allowed people to attach to the internet from home. And that was incredibly successful. So we watch the market, it adapts, it changes, and we innovate and see if we can add some value by starting a company and providing something.
So was your background tech before you started your first company?
Yes, it's been in tech, really in business and technology. So when I was in high school, I was involved in things like in junior high, I was part of Junior Achievement, which is a program for kids that are interested in business and building businesses. Then in the high school and collegiate level, I became part of a program called Distributed Education Chapters of America. And it's a business club that helps promote an understanding of business, how to operate a business, how to start a business. So I recall when I was in high school in the 70s, one of my projects was as part of the DECA, Distributed Education Clubs of America, was to start a business. So what I did is I started a radio broadcasting business. I found out that you can have a 10-watt community radio system and you can be on the air at your local high school with very simple steps back then through the FCC, get a license, set up a business. How do you acquire the equipment to get on the air? And I did that. One of my best friends in high school, we went to college together as well. He started a company in our town called Piggy's Pantry. He started a small grocery store, started as an ice cream shop in a beachside community that we grew up in Aptos, California. And it grew into Piggy's Pantry, which is probably still there today. But that was his high school program. So we were involved in business from very, very early days, very interested in it. As I got into college, I had to take some didn't have to, but I took some programming classes. I thought that would be an area of interest. It was interesting, wasn't my forte. So within a year and a half of leaving college, I decided, I don't want to be programming anymore. This is not my thing. And I went into the business side and never looked back. Well, really happy.
Well, that's a nice story of starting young and going with something that has changed all of our lives over the last few decades. To be in there early and grow with it. So as we wrap up, I try to think of one question for the guests to answer. Try not to make the question too difficult, but put them on the spot. Is what's the people skill that you have that enabled you to do what you've done?
Everybody has skills, and there are certain areas of strengths and weaknesses. I happen to be a people person. I like people. I like talking and listening. And so I use that to my advantage. But in terms of being an entrepreneur, you just have to be motivated. You have to be a bit patient because it's going to take a long time. And you have to look at rewards differently. I look at rewards not financially, which obviously everybody wants financial rewards, but I look at it as, how can I put my thumbprint on this industry? What can I do that's going to be a part of history in a sense? And that's just for me. And that helps motivate me and drives me day to day. So, that's kind of the persona you have to have, or at least that's my persona.
So you have the passion and you have the people component who buy into your passion.
Yes. And I will say this, our companies, for us, a successful exit, as we call it, is when you finally have liquidity in the company, you can sell the stock and you can, you earn out the money that you've built over time. So I've been acquired by some very large corporations, and we've gone public with some of our companies as well. And I learned along the way that being acquired by a large corporation is exactly why I'm an entrepreneur. Because even though I'm successful in those large corporations, it wasn't that much fun. Large companies and going to conference rooms and the politics, it always drove me back out. I got to start another one.
Okay. So you mean you want to keep it fun, is what I'm hearing.
Yep, exactly. Keep it fun and productive.
Well, Stephen, thank you for being a guest on Experienced Voices and sharing your experience and your knowledge about cybersecurity, your new venture, Exceed. And I think it'll be helpful for the entrepreneurs who are scaling their companies to have your perspective. So thanks for coming.
Gene, thank you very much for hosting me.
Okay, take care.
All right, bye-bye.
You have been listening to the podcast series Experience Voices. To hear more and subscribe, visit AmericanEntrepreneurship.com/podcast, where you will also find a form for listener feedback.